Check 121. 121. This is just a mic test. You don't have to respond to this one. Check 1 2 1. All right, guys. So, the ones that have just joined in, I just want to reiterate again. Uh, Alka ma'am is having some battery issues in her laptop. She's trying to restore the battery power as soon as she can, and she'll be joining us in a short while. Thank you for your patience. I would request you all to be patient for a little longer. Thank you. Simran, do you have any queries regarding anything? I did not understand your question that you texted me. All right, guys. So I'm getting a call from Alka ma'am. I'll respond to you guys. Simran and Molly, you can have your cameras and mics open. Ma'am is about to join us in a short while. Molly, do you have anything to ask?
नहीं भैया. Can you just give us a little flag while when we have to open? Like just text me when we have to open the floor for questions.
It will be after 20 to 25 minutes. 25 minutes.
Or just text us one, any one of us.
You can let me in. I'm so sorry. I've just never had this problem before.
It's absolutely fine, ma'am. I'll be letting you just in a while. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be cutting the phone now.
Sure.
Molly, Simran, ma'am is here. You guys can unmute yourself and open your cameras. I'm letting a ma'am in, okay? Okay, you guys are on mute. I would request Molly and okay, I'm admitting ma'am. And I'd request Simran to unmute you. Good morning, ma'am. A very warm. Yes, ma'am, you're audible. I'd request Molly and Simran to take over the feed from here. Thank you.
Greetings, ma'am, and our wonderful audience present here. Thank you so much, Alka ma'am, for such a short notice and that too with such a big time difference. We are truly elated to welcome you to this session and to our wonderful audience filled with. We introduce you to Alka Joshi ma'am, the author of the Jaipur Trilogy, comprising of 3 books that not only sound feel absolutely enchanting. The Henna Artist, The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, and The Perfumist from Paris. Alka ma'am was born in the city of Jodhpur and she was inspired by her mother to start writing. She received her bachelor's in arts degree from Stanford University and her MFA from California College of Arts. The Henna Artist was the May pick for Reese Witherspoon Book Club, and it has been translated into more than 20 languages, and it is also being made into a TV adaptation by Netflix starring Frida Pinto. The concepts of morality and human behavior, the tradition and modernity, all the while empowering women, has been a spotlight in her works that has truly touched a vast audience. Hence, we are elated to host you today, ma'am, on behalf of the Literary Society BIT Mishra. Excuse me, ma'am, you're muted right now. Can you please? No, ma'am, you're still muted.
I'm really sorry, ma'am. Now you might be able to
There we
hear us.
go.
I'm really sorry, ma'am, for that.
There we go. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And I really apologize for all the delays this morning. I had a lot of connectivity issues. Okay.
No, ma'am, it's completely fine. We would really love to have this session with you today.
So what is somebody wanting to ask me questions, or do you want me to just talk?
Yes, ma'am, we do have a lot of questions that we would like to ask you about your works, because the concepts and especially the titles that we have been going through are absolutely enchanting. Like The Perfumist of Paris is personally something. The title itself has drawn me to that book.
Yeah, it's fun. Now, I cannot take any credit for the titles. My publisher actually comes up with all the titles. In the first book, The Henna Artist, I wanted to title it The Enemy of the Crocodile. But what happened is, there is a proverb in the book: only a fool remains in the water and stays an enemy of the crocodile. And we know that Lakshmi does not want to be in the water with the crocodile Parvati. She wants to remain a friend of hers. But as we know throughout the book, that does not happen, and she does become an enemy. So that's why I wanted to call it The Enemy of the Crocodile. But the publisher said, nobody is going to understand what that means. We would just rather call it The Henna Artist, because publishers like HarperCollins, they have mounds of data that tells them what is the title that people will want to pick up off the shelf. They have mounds of data saying this is the kind of cover that is going to attract people to want to pull this book off the shelf. So I just decided then for all subsequent novels, they can go ahead and title them, because they are much better at it, and scientifically they know what's going to work. So they're the ones that came up with The Perfumist of Paris, which was interesting to me, because the first thing I asked was, is perfumist even a word? And they said, don't worry about it. People will understand what it means.
That was actually a really wonderful backstory for a title. Like the insight that you gave us on how publishing and the author's work is actually that was really interesting.
Yeah. And then there's a fine line for authors, how much of a fight am I going to put up for the cover that I want versus maybe what they want to do? How much of a fight am I going to put in for the amount of the number of pages that are going to be in there? Because right now, for fiction, the desired amount is about 300 to 350 pages. That's double spaced, and it's 12-point type. That is the ideal amount. So if you, let's say, want to put in a 500-page book, and your editor says no, then you have to figure out some way to justify what you're doing, or you really need to listen to them and have them tell you why it's better to do 350 pages. Because if they say data shows that people really don't have the mind span to be able to read 500 pages in one sitting, then you have to, listen to what they're having to say. And especially when I was a debut author with the Henna Artist, I just really wanted to pick my battles, because as a debut author, you have very little voice. They have pretty much all the power to say this works and this doesn't work. So I needed to listen to them. There was one instance in which I really wanted to push back. Actually, there were two instances. And that was with my agent, because I had my agent long before I had my publisher. And I was working with my agent on how to make this book a bestseller. She was very, very concerned, wanted to make this book a bestseller so that it could actually have a chance of a second book and a third book and a fourth book contract. And so in order to do that, one of the first things she said is, I want you to cut all the Radha chapters out of this book. I used to have Lakshmi chapter and then a Radha chapter, Lakshmi chapter, Radha chapter. And I said, why? I said, she's the second most important person in this book, the young sister. And my agent said, when you have two competing voices or three competing voices, however many you have, each one of them has to be equally compelling, because if they are not, people will lose interest. They only want to hear at that point from the compelling character, the most compelling one. And Lakshmi was the most compelling character. So my agent said, this is the one that you really need to focus on. What I wanted to do, of course, was to say, no, I don't agree. I think Radha is equally as compelling. And she said, okay, then prove me wrong. So I started to work on all the Radha chapters so I could make her as strong as Lakshmi and as interesting as Lakshmi. I sent it all back to my agent, and my agent said, it's not working. And so after trying it my way, I had to admit that maybe she was right. And in the end, when I did it her way, it actually did make the book stronger. It made it better. And I really needed to listen to her at that point. The second argument that I had with her was in the character of Malik. She really felt that he didn't need to be as much in the book as he was the manuscript that she was looking at. And I said, I think he is also very central to the story. Number one, because he's Muslim, and I wanted to have a Muslim character and a Hindu character, to interact with one another in a positive way. But I also felt that he was central to the story because he represents a socioeconomic group that is far different from the Singhs, let's say. And my agent said, no, really, he is taking away from Lakshmi's persona. And so I said, okay, I will cut him back, but I don't want to cut him out altogether. And she said, okay. So that's why Malik is reduced in the first book. But guess what? It allowed me then to use those same scenes that I had with Malik that really helped develop his character. And I was able to make a second book out of it. And that was The Secret Keeper of Jaipur. So in a way, it worked to my advantage to listen to her advice. And I still had a chance to do a little bit of what I wanted to do. The third instance in which I had to pick a battle is when my editor at the publishing house, now this is, we have the contract signed, and this is HarperCollins, and Kathy, my editor, is saying to me that we need to think about changing Hari's character. And I said, I don't want to change Hari's character. He is an awful man, and I want him to stay awful because I feel like that gives Lakshmi a reason to fight him. And she said, well, here is what's important for readers. Readers want to resonate with characters who are like them. And all of us, and all of your other characters, Alka, are exactly the way that we are. They are good, they are bad, they are happy, they are sad, they are joyful, they are miserable. And so we need for Hari to also exhibit that myriad of sort of his character throughout the arc of the book. And what I did instead is I asked him why he was such an evil character. And he actually answered me. And this is where I think a lot of authors will tell you that at some point, your characters take over. At some point, they want to tell you, and they will tell you what they want to do, how they want to be, where they want to be. And so I asked him, and he gave me a bunch of answers that made a lot of sense. And then I could move on and change his character. My editor's suggestion about that is that it ended up changing the final end of the book. And I think it was a much stronger ending. See, you have to sort of balance out what an editor or an agent is telling you, and you have to figure out for yourself, do I want to do it? Do I not want to do it? What if I try it their way? If it works, great. Then you probably have a real successful sort of transition, real successful change that you're making.
Okay, so is it like the role that your editor and your agent plays kind of close to a reader? Because it feels like that. It's you get a very different perspective from them, which is very different to you because you're the author, you're writing the story.
Right. And you know, a lot of people ask if I had my books throughout the world tend to be women, first of all. They are women from the ages of 30 to 65. And so I knew that that's my age, right? And so I'm in that category. I buy books. And so I thought, I'm writing for me. That's really who I'm writing for. And thank goodness, because if I'm writing it and I'm writing for me, I am very close to the subject matter and the characters themselves. So, but after that, I think you sort of like get lost in the story as an author, and you're not thinking anymore about who I'm writing for. And you really just are writing the story that you think is the most compelling. And your characters are helping you take this road as opposed to that road, and this intersection as opposed to that intersection. And you can really follow suit. So yes, your agent and your editor, I think especially if they are women, and especially if they are used to reading a lot of historical fiction, as my books are, they are going to tell you what your audience is probably going to resonate with. It's the same thing if you're writing a memoir, then you want to go with an agent, and they're probably going to appeal to an editor at the publishing house to buy your book if they are also very familiar with memoirs. Same thing if you're writing fantasy or sci-fi. You definitely want to try to have an agent who understands that genre and works with that genre all the time. Because here is something my agent told me. She was based in New York, and she said, I go out to lunch with editors all the time here in New York. And so I get to know what they like and what they don't like. I have personal relationships with them. And if my agent is representing a lot of historical fiction, she knows the editors who want to buy historical fiction. So this is why it's so important. I tell people this all the time. If you're going to solicit agents, you need to solicit someone who is interested and represents the genre that you are writing in.
One thing that I really love, yes, Simrandy, would you like to go?
Yeah, I would like to ask, as we were talking about women in this industry, so I'd like to know that what is the role of women in the publishing world? Like, what does it feel like?
What is the role of women in the publishing world? Well, there are far more women who are at publishers, who work at publishing houses than there are men. Unfortunately, the men always seem to be up at the top. And so the women below them are usually the ones who are making the decisions on what to buy. The men up at the top are usually making financial decisions, like I'm going to give this department this much money for promotion, this department this much money. So the women themselves are the ones who are deciding what they're going to buy in the publishing world, what's going to go out into the world. Now, the majority of books do not become bestsellers, right? So they're going to have some that are winners and some that are just going to do okay, and they're going to have a couple of flops. I think everybody knows that in the whole publishing industry. They're of course hoping for the bestseller, that they're working with the bestseller, but that doesn't always happen. And in the writing world, it used to be dominated by men, and really largely white men used to dominate the publishing world. They were the James Pattersons of this world, the John Grishams of this world, and I think in the Indian world, is it Chetan Bhag or somebody like that? I'm not sure who your authors are, the male authors who are selling a lot of books. But men generally, still to this day, get the most promotion and publishing dollars. So you can see that they have a head start, right? They may have written a very mediocre book, but if they're getting the ads in the paper, on social media, in the big billboards, if they're the ones that are getting those ads, you can see that most readers are going to be inundated by the promotion for that book, and they will most generally look for it in the bookstores and buy it. Women generally get a little bit lower promotion dollars. Some of them don't get any at all. And so we are still fighting that gender fight. That is still happening. Now, more and more women are writing. Definitely, they're writing romance. And they have historically written romance, but they don't get a lot of promotion dollars for them. They write romance. They love fantasy. They like to write fantasy. More and more are writing sci-fi, and definitely historical fiction women love to write. And women are climbing in all of these genres is because they are finally being given recognition. They're finally being given promotion dollars to help them sell their books. This is just of supreme importance. And this is where Reese Witherspoon came in. She was an actress who had stopped getting roles for women, good roles. She was starting to get these really bad scripts. And she said, why is it that men can look like Robert De Niro, not a handsome man? Why is it that men can look like him and get so much money for every book and get all of these scripts? And why is it that women, as they age, do not get those kind of script? We need to support, able to also get as much money as men and as good a script as a man in the world. So she thought, I read a lot. What if I could use my influence to help women get those kind of promotion dollars and that recognition in the literary world? That's where it all started with her. And then it just grew like mushroom because there were all these women out there hungry for books by women. Because, when women write female characters, they write them realistically. They write them the way we can all relate to them. And so Reese Witherspoon is one of the main reasons why women are writing today and writing in very large numbers. She has made it acceptable for women and made it a lot more recognized that when females write, females buy. So, it's a business, right? The publishing world is a business. And whatever you can do to make money for a publisher, they're happy with. So now finally publishers are saying, oh, okay, I would like to hear from women. And especially right now is a time when they want to hear from women of color, women who are writing something different than they know. And this is one of the reasons why my books have done really well and why the publisher likes them. They are writing about something that was not normally written about. Normally three subject matters are what the publishers had been used to when they got books about India. One of them was partition. You know, Salman Rushdie writes great books about partition. Fabulous. He's a great writer. Then there are books about the poverty in India. And poverty is written about, like Rohinton Mistry wrote a beautiful book, A Fine Balance, about, you know, the poor classes in India in the 1970s. And many more people have gone on to write about the slums of India. And this is what the publishers in the West call poverty porn. Some people are addicted to poverty, books about poverty. I'm not interested in those books personally, and I'm not really interested in covering ground that other people have covered. A third type of subject matter that publishers usually got is the immigrant experience. What is it like for somebody to come from India to the United States, to the UK, to Australia? What is that all about? And what are the obstacles that they face? I didn't want to write about that either. I want about the 1950s, 60s, and 70s in India, which is the time period that I know. We left India in 1967. So I have a lot of memories of that time period. And it's something that I wanted. I also wrote The Henna Artist as a tribute to my mother, who I think would have done fantastic things had she not had such a culturally restricted life. And by that, I mean that her entire future had been planned out for her by her parents. And she knew she was going to be a wife at an early age, a mother at an early age. She would not have a career. She would not be able to go back to college or finish college. These are just things that she knew she was not going to be able to do. But she made sure that I was going to be able to do all of those things. She gave me complete license to do whatever I wanted and make all the decisions in my life about my partner, about my career, about the college I wanted to go to. My parents never restricted any of that, and that is largely due to my mother. So I wanted to write about a life that I think she could have had in the 1950s, when the way that. So to me, I had a very specific subject matter, and I am writing about how all the different classes in India relate to one another, the wealthy, the middle class, and the poor. And I'm just writing about day-to-day life as it happens. So that was something very interesting for a publisher to put out there, because they said, this isn't one of those three subject matters. Now, some publishers passed because if it wasn't one of the three subject matters that they were used to getting, they didn't want to take a chance on it. But luckily, I ended up with an editor, an acquiring editor at HarperCollins, who has loved books about India and has been to India and understood exactly what I was writing about. So sometimes it is the right place at the right time. And it's the right subject matter that happens to come along that this particular acquisitions editor is going to resonate with.
One thing that I truly love about what you said about behind the scenes is women who are supporting women to write, and how women are able to actually portray female characters in their true form, in their raw form, more accurately in the books. Also, the other part that I truly enjoy is your in the entire behind the scenes writing process. I never thought that it's so intricately framed, and this is what goes on behind the scenes for writing books. So that really truly drew me in. So, ma'am, we have some questions for you regarding the trilogy. Simrandy, please go on.
Yes. Ma'am, the trilogy portrays the tension between tradition and modernity. How would you like to address that?
Tradition and modernity.
Like it's a balance between both of them. Like while it's keeping the tradition, it also is setting the characters in the modern time. Like we are seeing her in a city standing for herself. So how do you maintain that intricate balance?
I'm not sure that I was trying to strike a balance between the two. What, however, is show these iconoclastic women that I do think have existed throughout history. Um, a lot of people, how is she allowed to be this person, this independent person in the 1950s, when women weren't allowed to do that? Well, at any time in history, in any culture, you will find women who have defied convention. And so those are the women that are interesting to all of us. And so those are the women I want to write about. I don't really think about, am I writing contemporary? Am I writing traditional? I think in India, we have a lot of contrasts that naturally exist anyway. You will find women who only ever wear saris, and you will find women who only ever wear Western clothing. You will find women who only speak in English or mostly speak in English. You'll find women who are speaking in 4 different languages in any given day. You will find women who have servants who cook at home for them, and women who have to cook at home for themselves. There's a lot of contrasts in India, and at the same time that all of this modernity exists, there's also a lot of tradition that is still being followed after thousands of years. So I don't really see that I'm doing anything, different than that. What I did want to portray was a woman like my mother, who I think if she could have just been given a little more independence and a little more push, I think that she would have lived the life that I'm living now. So I think that that's kind of what I'm doing. If you write about India in any time period, you're going to run across a lot of traditional stuff that has always been happening. Our food has pretty much stayed the same. The way that we do arti for different festivals has stayed the same. We celebrate the same festivals that we've celebrated for thousands of years. We walk amidst sacred cows. We walked amidst cows and goats, and even in a modern city, you see that kind of thing, right? And if you go from the city to the villages, you see the contrast as you have always seen it. There has always been contrast. If you look at any Satyajit Ray movie, you will see that contrast easily. And he was, doing movies in the 50s, 40s, and 60s, right? If you read Rabindranath Tagore, you will see how the women that he's writing about in the 1910s and the 1920s and the 1930s, those are iconoclastic women. He's writing about women who were doing things that women of that era would have not done or been frowned upon. So I don't think there's anything unusual in what I'm doing. And I don't look at it as contemporary and traditional. I just look at it as a contrast that has always existed in India.
All right, ma'am. Molly, you have a question?
I'd just like to say that the way you talk about the contrast, personally, being a child of a working mother, I truly can relate how we see the contrast in Indian women, how they manage their work and they also manage the everything at home. It's just truly tremendous that you've taken it up and portrayed it so beautifully.
Thank you. Did you have a
Yeah.
question for me also?
I actually wanted to ask you, I actually wanted to point out about the fact that you said that how your character spoke to you. As an avid reader, we also have comfort characters that we ask questions to, and they speak to us. So, my question would be that which character did you connect to the most in your trilogy?
I connected to all of them because you can't write about a character unless you can connect with them. I relate to Lakshmi because she has parts of her that are me. And those parts are as a businesswoman and how she relates to her clients. I ran my own marketing and advertising agency for 15 years. So I completely, the kinds of things that she's doing to strategize how she's going to deal with her clients are things that I had to deal with. I can relate to Radha in the sense that she is a rebellious young woman. And I remember being that way with my mother when I was her age. So when I was 13, 14, 15, I would talk back to my mother. I would say, you don't know anything, I know everything. And I may not have said those words, but the way I acted towards her was just awful. And so I think that's what Radha is doing to claim her independence from Lakshmi. Malik is interesting to me because he, I think, has a lot of the traits of my younger brother, who is an entrepreneur. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he's very resourceful and lovable and, charming. And I think that's who Malik is. So each, character will have parts of you as an author in them. And that is what makes them relatable to you, because you can't write about a character unless you can relate to who they are. So that's kind of where that comes from. Parvati has bits and pieces of her. She is trying to be somebody that, she gains status in society as long as she stays within its confines. And so she's very careful to stay within those confines. And that is why she is Queen Bee. She has the money, so that affords her a certain modicum of respect, but she also has the ability to mine that wealth and that power to get all of the women around her on her side. And so I can relate to her because I have known women like her, and they're sort of the popular girls in class. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I could really relate to her, because I have been the unpopular girl looking at somebody like her and watching how is she manipulating everybody else. Thank you for your question. Who else has a question?
Simrandeep, would you like to go?
Ma'am, coming from that point, you have been very vocal about a lot of social issues that are still relevant to this state. And also, it involves a lot of influential organization. So, I would like to ask you what has motivated you to work towards that field? Because we see those little nuances in all the series, in all the books of the series.
Yes, and this is a major part of who I am. And I think a major part of who my mother was trying to get me to be. She was always very much of a feminist, even though she wasn't allowed to act that out. She imbued me with a lot of those ideas and principles. Stand up for yourself. It takes a lot of courage as a woman to get by in this world. You can do it. You just have to work hard, and you have to watch how other people do it and model yourself after them. So I think that what I'm always trying to do is to represent women in a way that presents them obstacles, but that gives them enough intelligence and the observational ability to be able to surmount those obstacles. I think it's very important for all of us to model the kind of woman that we hope our daughters, our nieces, our granddaughters are going to become. It's so important because they need those role models. So in each one of my books, we have very strong women who are either indirectly or directly claiming their voice and claiming their power. This is so important to me. The social issues that I encounter, that I talk about in my books, some people think that they are radical, but frankly, they are issues that have confronted humanity for thousands of years, no matter what culture we are talking about. So the issue of premarital sex. Hey, that's always been happening, no matter what generation, time period, culture you come from. People have slept together without marriage forever. People have become pregnant. Women have become pregnant outside of marriage forever. That is something that I want to talk about because it happens. Teenage pregnancy happens in India, in America, in the UK, in Russia. It happens. And then, of course, this idea of adoption is something that I think definitely in the 60s, 70s, was considered very shameful, that anybody had to admit they couldn't have their own child, and so they had to go out and adopt one and pretend that that was theirs. That used to happen a lot. It probably still happens. And, people just look the other way. So why is it so shameful? Why can we not just admit that this happens? And why do we have to imbue that with some kind of failing on our parts? So I think that it's important for us to talk about it. It's important to talk about these issues, to bring them to light. This other idea of women who somehow cannot subvert or circumvent their destiny as somebody else has prescribed for them. That's happened over time. Think about the Rani of Jhansi, Indira Gandhi. Think about, any woman who has broken through any kind of barriers. There were a lot of begums who became queens, who became Ranis at some point. So, we have to think about women not as special because they did that, but as women whose actions maybe we can emulate, maybe we can model ourselves after those women. So this is why I think that the social issues I bring up are important for all of us to discuss and about, and to think that maybe I could do this in my. Luckily, there was no one in my publishing team, whether it was my agent, whether it was any of my editors, whether it was the head honchos in publishing, nobody ever said to me, do not put this social issue in your book. Thank goodness, because I don't think I could have cut out any of that. It's so central to the story. These social issues are central to each of my stories.
It is quite an absolute need that people come out and talk about this, because there are a lot of issues that a lot of people want to talk about, but they don't know how to come out and just talk about it, or have a person. Even in books, it's very refreshing and it's very encouraging to see that it's been openly discussed, and that we have a place to just go and talk about it, discuss with it, and just know that it exists, and we have to sort of acknowledge it. It's nothing to hide about. Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, thank you, ma'am, for answering our questions. Now we'll be opening the floor. I would request the host to forward the questions to us.
Just a second, ma'am. I'll be taking a question right now.
One other, while you're doing that, one other social issue that I wanted to tackle in the book, and in each of my books, the Western world thinks that everybody who is not Hindu in India is fighting with somebody else who is, Hindu. There's this idea in the Western world that Hindus and Muslims are always at each other's throats. There are a lot of conflicts between the various religions and cultures in India. But I think in reality, when you live in India, you find that a lot of different cultures and religions coexist without any issues at all. That the kind of black-white riots that they have in America are sort of similar to the riots that are happening in India at any one time, because there's a certain group of people who are very upset about it. But there are 1.4 billion people in India, and the majority of them are not fighting with anybody all day long. So that is one of the things I try to point out in my books, by showing the symbiosis between a lot of cultures and religions. I try to mention Christians and Jews and Jains and Sikhs and Muslims and Hindus all living in a similar area together, because I think that's the reality of what happens. Okay, do we have some questions?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to let everyone know, those who want to ask a question, they can raise their hands as well, and we can take in question from the audience here. Okay, I do happen to have a question, ma'am, from Lily, so I'm going to just allow her.
Hi, Lily.
Hello, ma'am. So, as a lover of books based on old age eras, I would like to ask you that what kind of research did you do to capture the essence of 1950s India in your Jaipur trilogy?
Okay, really good question. I have a sort of a three-legged stool for my research. The first is that I question a lot of people. I talk to historians, academicians, and also people who lived through that era. And while it seems like a really long time ago, my father, who is 93, still remembers that era. He was born in 1933. He was the Quit India marches. And so he remembers that whole thing. He was very much involved in the independence and then the post-independence movement, because he became a civil engineer as a result of Nehru's call. Hey, you guys, we need engineers to rebuild India's infrastructure after the British left. India was just left in tatters. No wonder she was mired in poverty. The British had taken everything, all the good stuff they had taken for themselves until they couldn't take anymore. And then, you know, they left. They were supposed to have 1 year transition for Indian government to take over everything. And yet they left within a couple of months, which really left things in chaos. So Dad remembers all of that stuff. And then he still got some friends who are alive who remember what it was all like. And of course, I could ask my mother when she was alive about what was happening in her life in 1955 and onwards. So that's one part of the stool. The second leg of the stool is that I read a lot of books. So I read Tagore, I read Kamla Markandeya, I read a woman named Ruth Prawer Jabvala. And while she wasn't Indian, she lived in India with her Indian husband for 34 years in Delhi. And she wrote a lot of great books that tell you what life was like, just how it was lived day to day. So I read a ton of stuff, a lot of books that I have up here on my bookshelf. And I read fiction as well as nonfiction. So in order to portray the Maharanis in the Henna Artist and the Secret Keeper of Jaipur, I read a wonderful book by the Maharani Gayatri Devi called A Princess Remembers. And that informed me a lot about what palace life was like day to day, and the kinds of entourage that the Maharanis would have and the kind of things they were allowed to do and not allowed to do. And I read, there was another one called From the Palace to the Purdah. And that was about a Maharani who tried very hard to get rid of the purdah, and then she wasn't able to do that. So I read fiction and nonfiction books. And then the third part of this stool is that I watch a lot of movies. And luckily, India has made a ton of movies over the years. They started making movies long before Hollywood made movies, which, by the way, the Western world doesn't seem to know at all. And, you know, the Western world likes to take credit for a lot of things, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I would watch movies. So I watch a lot of Satyajit Ray movies. Those are just absolutely phenomenal for letting you know what day-to-day life was like in his era. And I watched movies that were like, I watched the Devdas in 2002. I think it was that Devdas with Shah Rukh Khan and Aishwarya Rai, and that informed me what maybe the courtesans, what the life of courtesans was like inside the Havelis. So those are the three ways in which I get a lot of information. One of the movies that I saw was called Mr. and Mrs. 55, and it starred Madhubala. And Madhubala was was a young woman and she was being betrothed to this young man. They did not want to be married. And then they found out that in 1955, it was the first year that Hindus were allowed to get a divorce. So this is why in 1955, this book takes place, The Henna Artist, because I wanted Lakshmi to be able to get a full-fledged divorce after 13 years of pretending that her husband had deserted her when she was the one who had deserted him. And she needed to make a clean break from him. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is one of the things that is very important for me in each of my books to talk about are all of the ways in which Indians and India, the Indian subcontinent, and that includes Bangladeshis and Sri Lankans and Pakistanis, you know, because India used to be all of that, right? So it's important for me to be able to say to the world, hey, there's a lot of things that the Indian subcontinent has contributed to the world that you don't know anything about. And so I like to talk in the Henna Artist about all the herbal remedies that now they practice in the West that really came from thousands of years of Indians practicing it. And those are things like the golden lattes at Starbucks. I mean, you know, turmeric has been used, haldi has been used by Indians forever as a way of, you know, seasoning food, but also it's an anti-inflammatory, and the West is just catching up to that. And then in the Secret Keeper of Jaipur, I'm talking a lot about gold and the way that gold is designed and the gems are cut. And this is what happens a lot in Jaipur, right? Jaipur is a gem cutting capital of the world. But a lot of people don't know that. They don't know that the Queen of England, when she wears that fancy crown and her fancy jewels, that a lot of those jewels were cut in India. That's where the artisans live. And then in the third book, The Perfumist of Paris, I'm talking about the ingredients, some of the main ingredients, sandalwood and tuberose and lavender and cinnamon and clove that go into fragrances that we use in our bodies and in our environments today. They are sourced in the Indian subcontinent because the Western climate cannot produce what the Indian tropical climate and the really hot climate of places like Rajasthan can produce. So I just want the world to know that while they think that France is the perfume capital of the world, India deserves a lot of recognition and praise for what she has contributed to the world's comfort and beauty.
Those were some really great techniques of research, ma'am. Thank you so much for such an insightful answer. Also, I love the inclusivity that is showcased in your words. It's very rare these days. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Lily.
Okay, so we can have some other questions as well. I can see Priyanka raising her hand, so I'll ask her to unmute and have your question for ma'am here.
Good morning, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hi. Okay. If you will just give me a second to switch on my video.
There
Good
you
morning,
are.
ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm Priyanka. So I had one question to you, which was actually my immediate thought about upon reading your trilogy, is that you have continuously explored the struggle that one goes through in staying true to their roots, but keep up. So this is something that persists in all of your, and it still persists today, maybe even more so in our world. So I just wanted to ask you how you expect to see society right now go through this age-old problem.
I think I missed what the problem was. I'm so sorry. I think you cut out for a second. What's the actual problem that you're talking about? I think she's muted again, so maybe you could unmute her. There.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Actually, my question is that you write a very prevalent theme in your work is the struggle between staying true to your roots while in a world that is so rapidly modernizing that if you can't catch up, it's not possible to survive. So then it's a problem that is still there in today's society. So I was asking that as the author of three such books, how do you expect today's society to combat this problem?
I think it is really difficult to hold on to your tradition and to modernize yourself. And I don't think it's 100% possible. There's just no way. But I usually tend to see it's the women who will hold the tradition together. It's the women because of how they cook, the way that their mothers cook, the way that their grandmothers cooked. So they will move that tradition forward. I think that the fewer processed foods that we can eat today and really cook the way that things were cooked way back when, that would go a long ways toward bridging that gap between modern and traditional. I think that another way to modernize is to, give ourselves access to all this digital, devices. And I think India does a great job of that already. Everybody seems to have a mobile phone. Everybody's always connected 24/7. But are we connecting to the right people? Are we connecting to our mothers and grandmothers and sisters and brothers? Or are we just connecting to people that we want to date? or are we just connecting to people who want to go to a movie that we want to go to? So I think that connectivity is great, but we do need to stay in touch with our roots. And I think maybe another thing is that when we celebrate festivals, I think we need to understand why did that particular festival even start? So, for example, Holi is the start of spring. And maybe there are other ways besides, throwing that wonderful colored powder at each other. Are there ways that we can celebrate the roots of the festival? Are we going to go plant a tree? Are we going to go, harvest something that has now become ripe, just with our friends, with our family, and whatnot? So I think that there are ways to reflect back on our roots in almost every part of the ways that we are modernizing. And by the way, this whole thing that I see in Bollywood all the time, the sort of very revealing clothes that women wear, the 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 way that people hop on motorcycles with the guy and then they're like going off on a big journey and whatnot. Listen, that only is important to you during those teenage years and maybe into your early 20s. The real business of getting on with life is not that movie, is not that movie. And I do think that those kinds of movies give people all kinds of ideas about what it's like to be a modern person in the world today. I think being a person in the world today means that you have integrity, means that you care about people and you show them in all kinds of ways that you care about them. And I think that being a modern person in the world today really means that you show in every fiber of your being that you intend to keep up your promises. Those are the ways in which I think we really become good people. We really become caring, good people who give back. This is one of the things I really like to do. I'm 66 now, and so who knows how much longer I'm going to be alive, 10 years, maybe 15 years, 20, who knows? But at this point, it's very important for me to give back. I don't want to hop on a motorcycle with the latest good looking guy who shows up on the screen. I'm really interested in knowing that there are women out there that I can help, that there are women out there who need a boost of confidence and self-esteem and maybe a little luck, and I can maybe help them get there.
Thank you, ma'am. That was really, really insightful. And as someone who faces that struggle herself, in a way, as a young adult, that felt really encouraging. Thank you.
One of the things that also, I think is important is that if you're a mother or you're going to be a mother, please raise your daughter and your son in exactly the same way. I see too many mothers give so much more importance to their boy, or they raise their boy in exactly the same way that they saw other people raise their boys, or maybe they saw their mother raise their brother. In India, so much importance is given to the boy in the family. And I would encourage every mother, and this is part of modernization that I think is good for women, that you can actually model yourself after people who are doing just that, that they are raising their son to also do the dishes, to also take the responsibility for, um, uh, I don't know, taking the trash out, to take the responsibility for making sure that their sister gets to school on time. Um, I think that there's a huge opportunity missed when we don't raise boys from a very early age, the same way that we raise girls. We only perpetuate the gender difference as those two age. We only perpetuate the way that men are given priority in this world. So reevaluate. If you are going to be a mother, or if you are a mother, please reevaluate the way that you are raising both of those genders.
All right. Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thank you, Priyanka, for your question. We'll move on to Samina. Um, Samina, you can ask your question to the ma'am now.
Hello, ma'am. It was really nice hearing your motivating words. My question to you would be, what would be your advice to young novel writers like me? I've been trying my luck for a while with chapbooks, and as you had mentioned earlier, that reading and consuming more media opens us to a world of information and possibilities. So, what would be your advice for young writers to hone their skills as well as explore the possibility of creativeness in various media forms as well?
Mm-hmm. So I think that in today's media, it's very easy to write something and to dash it off. But good writing takes time. The Henna Artist took me 10 years to write and to get published. And during that time, I just got better and better and better at writing, better at holding tension throughout a book, better at understanding pacing, better at the way that dialogue is actually spoken as opposed to the way that we normally want to write it down. I got better at developing characters throughout a novel so that they all had some kind of change happen in them. That could be positive change or negative change, it doesn't matter, but every character does have to change. And when I learned that, the subsequent book, The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, and then The Perfumist of Paris, each of those only took me 2 years. And now I'm writing my fourth book, and that's only going to take 2 years. So it's getting faster because I understand now what not to do in a novel. So resist the urge to constantly be publishing your work out there in the digital world. Really make sure that what you are writing is clear, it's concise, and that it has a message that resonates with you and hopefully will resonate with a lot of other people. So, patience with yourself in making sure that you're doing it the way that is really professional and maybe is meaningful is very important. I think that perseverance is important because I had to do 30 rewrites of that first novel in order for my agent to say, now we are done. And for my subsequent novels, I do about 15 rewrites. You have to rewrite in order to write well. You have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And believe me, every single time you go back over your version, you will see where the errors are. You will see where you can tighten up a sentence. You will see where you can tighten a paragraph. These are These are only things that you can see in your work when you go over and over and over it. Maybe another thing that I always tell people is if you are studying with a teacher, whether it's at university level, college level, whether it's, a workshop outside of that, if you are studying, then you need to study with people who are recently published. There are instructors out there. There's lots of people who will teach you writing, but maybe they have not been published for 20 years, 30 years. Those are usually people who are not in a position to get your work out to a publisher because they are out of that world. The publishing world has changed a lot in 20 years and 30 years. And you want to be studying with people who are relevant to the publishing world today. The other thing is you want to study with people who are in your genre. If you are writing, let's say, romance, please study with somebody who publishes romance. I was talking to somebody the other day, and she said that she was studying with an instructor who only wrote nonfiction, and she is writing a memoir. And I said, well, what sense does that make? People who write nonfiction are writing in a very different way than you are, and they won't be able to give you the kind of advice that you need. So I think that is super, super important. I think also for young people, it's important to vet your work with others. And I don't mean somebody who's going to say, oh, I like it or I don't like it. What you're looking for is constructive criticism. You want to vet your work with maybe somebody who reads a lot and is able to tell you maybe what genre your work fits into or how your work compares to this person as opposed to this author. So that's the kind of constructive criticism that you're looking for. If you're only around people who keep saying, oh, I really like it, that's not helping you at all. That's not helping forward your agenda as an author. I hope that helps.
Yes, ma'am, that was very insightful. And thank you so much for your inspiring words. I and many other girls like me can only aspire to be in a position like you. And with your advice and suggestions, I'm very sure I could get in the direction of writing an amazing novel.
Yay.
Okay, guys. So I guess we'll be winding up fast now. We have a couple of questions more, ma'am. Ayush, you're up next. Just give me 1 second. Okay, Ayush, you can ask your question to ma'am now. Ayush, am I audible to you?
Hi. Oh, hi.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
I said Ayush from Rajasthan.
Yes. I was born in Jodhpur.
I am from Rajasthan. So as we know that our environment, our culture, the people we live with in our childhood and growing period affect almost every aspect of our life further. So our literary journey also starts with fairy tales of grandma. So what is the role of our environment?
I need to be in